Deep breaths, Eli. Deep breaths. I swear, sometimes my timing is just impeccable and laughable, if I'm being honest. On Monday, I was just sitting so peacefully at Starbucks, writing the story that went up on Wednesday, thinking to myself, take your time, Eli. You've got all day. Today is your Saturday, essentially, buddy. And so I did. Anyway, I finished up, headed home around 3 o'clock, and by 3:15, I was in my bed, ready to take a beautiful nap before hopefully recording that episode. So the day was going just peachy, having a wonderful time. Lo and behold, at 3:30, I get a text from my coworker asking if I would like anything from Starbucks for my shift tonight. There is nothing like a gut-wrenching stomach drop to just snap you out of nap time. So, instead of dreaming peacefully and recording an episode, I had to go bartend for 7 hours and close. And of course that happened on the day I told myself I would start doing 2 episodes a week so I could get closer to 1 billion views. Whatever. I did, however, take her up on that offer and get yet another coffee from Starbucks on the day. Oops. I needed it, though. That was literally the first time that's ever happened, and it's honestly the worst goddamn feeling. I swore to myself I will never do it again, and now I'm overly paranoid about double, triple, quadruple checking my schedule. I'm up a couple bucks, though. Learned a valuable lesson, as my mother would say, and it's past. Finito. Anywho, we are back on track, in a much better mood this morning, and ready to possibly ruin all of those good vibes. Welcome to Murder in the Morning. As promised, today we get back to the gosh darn basics. The world and its never-ending array of creepy, cuckoo serial killers. Before we jump in, though, I would just like to recognize a couple other countries who have been listening. Both Canada and the United Kingdom are showing up among the many other countries out there who are listening each week. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So, in honor of you guys, this is the story of Australian serial killer Arnold Sodeman. Silly me. Also known as the Schoolgirl Strangler. This one hurts. It's a doozy. My sources for today come from the True Crime Library, the Australian Dictionary of Biography, slogan.com, Wikipedia, and of course the ever-lovely Murderpedia. Just before the turn of the century, Arnold Sodeman was born in December of 1899 near Melbourne, Australia, to Carl Sodeman and Violet Esther. In typical murder childhood fashion, it proved very difficult growing up. His mother couldn't do much as she suffered from severe amnesia, and his father didn't even like the kid, let's be honest. Suffering from constant abuse, Arnold ran away from home at only 13 years old, where he worked in the coal mines of, I believe it's Gippsland. Escaping his father, however, didn't help him escape that terrible, wretched behavior he learned growing up. For the next few years, he worked various odd jobs here and there while spending a couple of nights in jail for theft, forgery, robbery, smaller level crimes of that nature. After his final conviction of, I believe it was forgery in 1926, when he was in his mid-20s, Sodeman settled here in Gippsland, about 2 hours east of Melbourne. Here, the sociopathic tendencies really start to show up. And what I mean by that is he blended very, very well into the community. So much so that, quote, on July 17th, he married Bernice Cecilia Pope at Collingwood with congressional forms. A daughter was born in 1928, and the marriage was a happy one. Although Sodeman seemed to suffer from occasional bouts of depression and frequent drunkenness, he was never violent to his family, end quote. It appeared as though he was basically only ever a slight danger to himself. But other than that, a decent guy. Before I get any further, and I should have probably mentioned this at the beginning if you couldn't tell from the title, this case is highly centered around the disgusting acts against young girls. So heads up, trigger warning. Okay. At the age of 31, Arnold's childhood abuse, the alcoholism, and mental illnesses finally caught up with him. In November of 1930, a group of schoolgirls had been outside together at the playground, just enjoying themselves, swinging on the swings, doing what young girls do, when a man they may have not have particularly known, but could have definitely recognized, he noticed these girls. And, disgustingly enough, he decided that he was particularly fond of one of the young girls, Mina Griffith, to be specific. So, he approached them, but in order to do what he came to do, he needed to get the girl alone. Quote, he gave the other girls some money and told them to go to the shop to get some candy. Meanwhile, he told his victim that he had a different errand for her to run. By the time the little girl's friends returned to the playground, there was no sign of the man or their friend. Griffith's body was discovered 2 days later at Ormond in an abandoned building. She had been gagged, bound, and strangled to death. End quote. And I hate to say it, but you probably could have guessed. But the autopsy showed signs of sexual assault as well. Police had nothing to go on, and her case was ice cold almost immediately. However, they didn't have to wait long for the strangler to strike again. 2 months later, in January, Arnold Sodeman took his second victim. Quote, on January 10th, 1931, he abducted 16-year-old Hazel Wilson and strangled her to death. He dragged her into a vacant lockup, raped, and murdered her, and then stripped her. Her body was also found in the suburb of Ormond. He had gagged both girls and tied both their hands behind their backs with portions of their own clothing. End quote. Right away, it was obvious to investigators that these two crimes were linked and almost certainly committed by the same individual. However, this happened to be the only lead police had. There, no DNA, no evidence, nothing really left behind at the scene of the crime besides the victim's own clothing. All they had was two very, very similar crime scenes. And the media, they went wild. Obviously, they covered his crimes so aggressively that it clearly spooked Arnold, and he took off to Inverloch, which was 70 miles away. And yet again, Hazel's case now goes cold, but for years this time. Maybe he got smarter or was simply scared of getting caught, but the Schoolgirl Strangler takes a 5-year hiatus at this point. 5 years. I truly don't know how he managed to do that. Or honestly, if he even did take a 5-year break, I'm not entirely sure. But to go from 2 girls in 2 months to not committing a crime for 5 years is either completely sociopathic or very impressive. It wasn't until New Year's Day, sadly enough, 5 years later, that he killed again. This time, a 12-year-old girl. Quote, he saw Ethel Belshaw on the beach and took her for a walk under false ice cream promises. He raped and killed her in very identical circumstances. End quote. And again, immediately, the police and surrounding communities were just reminded of the 2 horrific schoolgirl murders from 1930 years ago, and everybody knew he was back. Thankfully, they ramped up the investigation this time around. No more pussyfooting it. Can I say that? That's such an old word, pussyfooting, and I don't know why I wrote it in there. Anyway, according to slogan.com, quote, this time around, police tried being much more thorough. They interviewed over 10,000 people, including Arnold Sodeman himself. However, he didn't attract any attention whatsoever, even though it was known that he was in the area of the latest victim's disappearance at the same time as her abduction. End quote. This is insane. Like, that was already enough, but it was reported that he was the last to be seen with the first victim, Mina Griffith, and now the third victim, Ethel Belshaw. And he still hasn't raised any red flags. Fucking how? I don't like when I said he blended well, he blended so well. 11 months later, and again, like, the timing of his crimes are so sporadic. And this one is a little extra fucked up. The Strangler kills once more. This time, he targeted a fellow coworker's 6-year-old daughter. 6 goddamn years old. I mean, come on. And her name was June Rushmer. As to how he committed this horrific crime, I'll let Arnold explain it himself, and this comes from his own statement regarding the crime. So, quote, I saw June Rushmer on the footpath walking towards her home near the tennis court, and she said, give us a ride. I knew her, and she knew me. I agreed and rode down to the stock route and turned down the road leading to the sanitary depot. About 100 yards from the corner, she said, this is far enough. I got off the bike and said, you can walk home. And then as she started walking, I made a run towards her and she ran into the bush. I ran after her and caught her around the neck and she started to scream. I held her by the neck and she went limp all of a sudden. And then I took off her bloomers and jammed them into her mouth. I got a belt from her frock and tied it over her mouth and around the back of her neck. End quote. I can't tell if it makes it creepier that he says it all so dryly, like he was, as if he were watching somebody else do it almost. Like a third person sort of view. I really want to understand, like I mentioned this before, but his thought process over the years. Not exactly why he liked little girls. That's not a new concept. Or even why he enjoyed strangling them. But why the completely senseless, sporadic timing of it. He kills twice in 2 months, then proceeds to allegedly stop for 5 years and appears completely normal. And after 5 years, he just gets back on the wagon for one day, decides to take another year-long break before killing a 4th victim. Why? I can't grasp that part of it at all. Ugh. Okay. After he horribly took June's life, police still didn't have any evidence pointing toward Arnold whatsoever. He's been seen with at least 2 of the victims before they were killed, interviewed by police in the area of the crimes, and they still have nothing. I mean, this guy was completely out of the investigation's crosshairs. In it, but in a blind spot, I guess. I honestly think it was pure luck that this monster was caught. The only people that even looked his way were those coworkers of his. So at the time, he had been working for a road construction company, and he was always known to ride his bike everywhere. And June had been reported to be seen with a man on a bike. His coworkers, they picked up on this eventually. Quote, Sodeman always rode his bicycle to work, and his coworkers began to joke with him when the news broke of the suspect on a bike. Usually able to take a joke, Sodeman would break into a furious rage and threaten anyone who would make such a joke. Everyone pretty much left it at that, except for one man who went to the police with this story, sensing that Sodeman reacted too severely. End quote. And I mean, thank God for that one guy who, with a brain, sensed the obvious and took it seriously. I mean, it doesn't, if he were wrong, it wouldn't have hurt or harmed anybody to go in and say, hey, this guy looks interesting, for the crimes, blah, 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 blah. And if he wasn't the guy, he wasn't the guy. But he was. He fucking was, and this guy knew it. So the police went to Arnold's place and asked him to come down to the station. Almost willingly, he went. And after a few hours of interrogation, he confessed to all 4 murders. Just up and poof. And get this. Listen to this. The police didn't believe him. They literally didn't believe him. Like, excuse me, guys. What the fuck? He was last seen with multiple victims, and now he's telling you he did it, and you still won't take him? I mean, how goddamn innocent do you think him to be? Sodeman literally had to provide the police with details of the girls' final meals to prove that he was the actual killer. Like, he would know, for example, what ice cream he bought the girls, or the snacks or candies he would, whatever. After getting charged, clearly the trial was a breeze, and Arnold Sodeman was sentenced to hanging for his crimes. Before long, though, in June of the same year, the Schoolgirl Strangler hung from a noose in the Metropolitan Gaol at Pentridge, which I assume is the penitentiary that was housing him at the time. This final part, if you'll bear with me, I did find very, very interesting. However, it doesn't explain. It kind of starts to explain everything over the past 37 years and how he lived. So, quote, when an autopsy was conducted after his execution, doctors soon began to understand why Sodeman, a seemingly calm and upright citizen, could resort to heinous murder. It seemed that Sodeman suffered from chronic leptomeningitis, which is an inflammation of the tissue covering the brain. The inflammation was activated by large intakes of alcohol, and Sodeman was known to have taken to the bottle in the last few years of his life. End quote. So, I mean, alcohol maybe wasn't the root cause, but it definitely made it worse and worse and worse over the years, which is why possibly he went from theft and forgery when he was younger to committing rape and murder and kidnapping as a 30-year-old adult. Maybe had he been born 100 years later, this could have all been avoided with proper medical care, but who knows? And when asked why he confessed, all that Arnold said was this, quote, I've had enough. Whether that meant he's had enough death and destruction in his life, or that he's had his fill, either way, good riddance, buddy. You don't deserve to be here. Well, I know today, again, it was a little bit shorter of an episode. Still trying to pump out 2 a week, even though I can't read my friggin' work schedule. But we're getting to it. Okay, dokie. Questions, anybody? Nope. Awesome. You folks have yourself a wonderful, wonderful, not crumpy wumpy day. Okay? Bye-bye. I love you.